2 decades in the paddock as a full-time rider, 255 MotoGP Premier Class starts. That is 52 more than Jorge Lorenzo. That is almost double of Mick Doohan. Quite the career that Aleix Espargaro has had, and that career, on a full-time basis anyway, has concluded here in Barcelona. Simon, you will miss Aleix. I will miss Aleix. That's not what you're interested in, though. The case that we want to make is that MotoGP will miss Aleix. Why?
I mean, Aleix is a unique character. Everyone knows that, as well as, this really impressive journeyman career that he's had, where he's went from basically do nothing 125 and 250 rider into a random MotoGP rider, back to Moto2, up the ranks through CRT whenever that wasn't where you wanted to be with your career, and then eventually into MotoGP, into good results, into multiple factory bikes, and eventually into this role at Aprilia, where he became the talisman of the entire team, where he took them to places that Aprilia had never been to before in MotoGP. No one else has a career like that. I don't see anyone else having a career like that at any time in the near future. But beyond that, he's the voice of the paddock in a lot of ways. He's the guy that is going to be there to speak out on safety issues. He's the guy that is going to advocate for his fellow riders, for people who've been injured, for safety concerns, for track modifications, for the calendar being punishing on the paddock. He's a really strong voice for a lot of the things that the paddock need a strong voice on. And apart from all his on-track stuff, there's no obvious replacement for the off-track stuff either.
Now, we'll get to the sort of the controversial side of him in a second, even though that's not really the right word, but sort of the part that rubs people the wrong way maybe sometimes. But you have to appreciate the career, because, again, this is a rider who debuted in 2004. The first time he's finished in the top 10 in any class in this paddock, not in a race but in a season, was 2014 with Ford Yamaha in MotoGP. The first time he stood on the podium was in Moto2 after he's already been a MotoGP rider. Now, you read those things out and you go, well, this must be a pay rider. This must be a guy who does not belong here. This must be a guy who brings a budget every single time. This must be a guy who is taking up good spots. Somebody else should be here instead. And that lack of results in the past was something Aleix was being taunted over. I remember he had a Twitter spat with Danilo Petrucci, where Danilo Petrucci made fun of his, of his career records across all the classes. And that's gone. All of that's gone because of what's happened at Aprilia. All of those, doubts, questions. Yeah, he's not, the greatest talent in this paddock, but he's achieved so much in the final years of his career, whereas normally it's the other way around. How?
He said it himself, I think, best on Sunday at the end of his career. Someone asked him about this, and he said, hard work beats talent. He is an incredibly hard worker. He is the fittest guy in MotoGP. Now, he's off next year to probably go straight into at least a season as a professional cyclist, which you don't just turn up and do. That's a huge task. But that's the level of his talent. He works his ass off whenever you speak to the Aprilia guys in terms of development, in terms of improving the bike. He's the guy that is always up for going to do days in the wind tunnel. He's the guy who's always thinking about what they need to do to make the bike better. It's a constant process. He's a key part of it, and he's essentially turned the Aprilia into a winning machine with himself at the helm of that project. He's built himself a bike, a team, everything he needs to utilize his own talent.
As you said, voice of the paddock, but also a guy who has very much worn his heart on his sleeve. A guy who maybe doesn't have as much of a filter as some of the other riders in MotoGP, but a guy who has always been confident enough in what he's saying to just, speak about things. And, that has rubbed people the wrong way. There are legitimate things being held over Aleix. He's the rider that comes to my mind when I think MotoGP rider who has slapped a rival on track. That's Aleix Espargaro, isn't it? But it's also, you feel like he has a reputation, I don't know if in this paddock, but certainly outside of the paddock, but I think in this paddock a little bit too, for speaking out too much, for offering his opinion too much. I don't always agree with his opinion. You don't always agree with his opinion. He has a very sort of rigid view of racing, to where he's a proponent of non-contact racing, for instance. He has some very rigid views on how things should be in this paddock. But we're grateful he's expressed those views.
Absolutely. The paradox for me with Aleix fans is always that lots of fans complain that they don't want our riders to become F1 style PR robots, but then Aleix gets a lot of criticism for being the exact opposite of that, for being the guy that's always willing to say things that maybe no one else wants to say or that you don't think should be said at all. He has opinions I don't agree with. Absolutely. There's, like you said, around the way that I think that racing is conducted, he says things that I don't agree with. The good thing about him is he knows it's his opinion. He knows that others have different opinions. There are some days I would love to hear the results of safety commission meetings where he's in there giving those opinions to some of his fellow riders, because they don't always agree with him either. In fact, a lot of the time they don't agree with him. But he does it because he wears his heart in his sleeve, because it is actually his opinion, because that's the way he feels about things, because he's not afraid to open his mouth and say what he feels about things. And I mean, as anyone that follows me on social media knows, that's something I can absolutely identify with, because I think I'm quite similar, and I don't think it's a bad thing to have people who have good, strong opinions based on experience and who aren't afraid to air them in this world, especially whenever it's about things like safety.
I want to go back to something you said, and something that Aleix said, hard work beats talent, but of course, as you pointed out, the talent's there. The talent has always been there, and if you look at Aprilia specifically, if you look at his time at Aprilia, and you go through the list of teammates, he has been borderline a career ender for people. The only guy who has really withstood the Aleix Espargaro experience at Aprilia has been Maverick Vinales, and even then it's been tougher than maybe he expected.
The only guy in Aleix's entire career in the Premier class to have withstood him in any sense is Maverick Vinales, because whenever you look back at that MotoGP career that goes back over a decade, Maverick is the only rider to ever beat Aleix in the championship standings while his teammate. And he did it twice. He did it at Suzuki and he did it again in 2024 at Aprilia. But the guy has consistently been the fastest guy in the team that he's in at any one point. He's beaten people like Andrea Iannone. He's beaten super talents that we thought were going to be really impressive on the way up. That's just, he's strong, he's fast. You don't fight for a MotoGP championship in this era, this super competitive era, without being incredibly talented, everything else aside, and he managed to do that a few years ago.
It's fitting that we're here. It's fitting that, obviously in tragic, unfortunate circumstances, we ended up here for the end of his full-time career, but this is the Aleix place. If you go back through many of his finest moments, he's demon fast here, isn't he? He's not gone away, obviously. He has the Honda test rider deal. We'll hear from him again. We'll see him do wildcards again. He is probably going to be the focal point of that wildcard program, because Stefan Bradl is basically stopping and Taka Nakagami will be on a more limited schedule almost certainly. But he will not be a full-time presence anymore. He will not speak to the media every day and all that jazz. There is a footprint he leaves on the grid. He's huge friends with Jorge Martin. The new boy Fermin Aldeguer, who comes in, is also part of that clique. And obviously Aleix has, relationships with other riders too, but Jorge, Fermin, different guys.
Yeah.
They're not Aleix, and I'm not sure there's a new Aleix coming.
I don't see another Aleix Espargaro anywhere in this grid. He's got his proteges, his kids that he's mentored all the way literally to the very top of the sport, with Jorge Martin lifting the title. But like you say, Val, they're different people. They're not him. There's no one as fiery. There's no one as heart and sleeve. There's no one as willing to get themselves into trouble with their press officers and their team bosses and the championship organisers by saying things that maybe they don't want to hear. But that's our loss, and I guess probably Dorna's gain a little bit, because it's going to make their life a little bit easier not having the Aleix voice sometimes shouting and screaming about certain things that happen in MotoGP.